Hello and welcome to another episode of the State of Politics. I'm joined by my usual co-host Patrick McGilp, and we have an absolute belter of a guest today. We have got the best pundit in Scottish football and one of the top men in Twitter politically. It's Michael Stewart. Michael, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks very much for having me on. Yep,
Uh,
that's some introduction. An absolute belter. I've been called that once or twice, that's for sure.
yeah, not quite a sci-fi interview. I think everybody's probably seen that we drive about Edinburgh with you, but yeah, I'm really delighted to have you on. So just to kick off, I know everybody will probably know you from BT Sport and BBC, but politically, could you give us a kind of wee insight into what your own political views are?
Yeah, well, I mean, if anybody doesn't know, I'm very much in favour of Scottish independence, and I just think it's a normal state of affairs for a country to be able to run its own affairs, and in a interconnected world as we live in at the moment, that ability to be able to make decisions that are in your own interest, but work in collaboration with others, is hugely important. And unfortunately, at the moment, we're in a union which is incapable of actually being able to do that, because simple arithmetic dictates that we're outnumbered by our next door neighbours, and I just don't think that's a acceptable situation to be in nowadays, when you see we're surrounded by countries of a similar sort of size who do not have the resources that we have, yet by any metric it appears that they are doing better than us. And I think it's logical that the reason for that is that they actually control their own affairs.
Michael, have you always had a passion for politics, or was it something that sort of was sparked by the referendum, like for me and Declan?
Well, I'm guessing I'm a good bit older than you and Declan, so I could. That's for me. The referendum was such a tremendous thing, because it was an awakening for so many people when it came to politics. You just it's incredible how there is this different perception of the referendum depending on what extreme of the debate you come from. The hardline unionists view it as toxic, such a harrowing experience, whereas I think for people in the middle and on our side of the debate, there's a recognition that it was a very positive thing, because for too long, people involved in politics wanted it to be a closed shop. They lived off of the apathy of people who didn't care, whereas politics is every strain and strand of society is affected by politics. So it's important that the people understand what's going on. So for me, it's been long before the referendum, as I said, because I'm a wee bit older than you guys, and I probably trace it back to when I went down to England when I was 16, when I went down to Manchester. And when you leave home, you get a different perspective of things. You see things slightly differently, looking from afar. And I was surrounded by my peers who were from all over Europe, predominantly, and a few others from outside of Europe as well. And we're all the same. But I've got this, I'm generally, and I'm an inquisitive person. I ask questions. I wonder why. Why are things the way they are? And simply don't just take it as, well, they are just because they are. It's like, well, why? And I always felt that these other countries, they run their own affairs. Why does Scotland not run its own affairs? And the more questions I asked, the more knowledge I gained, the more understanding I had of things. It just didn't make sense to me, and it never has made sense to me. And I accept and I understand that there is another side to the debate, and unionists will put forward the case of why it's beneficial for Scotland to be in the UK. But I don't think if you posed the premise of the union that Scotland is in to any other of those guys that I was surrounded by, and not many of them are interested in politics, but if you propose the situation of you'll be governed by your next door neighbour in a so-called union, and they will be able to dictate policy, even if your country doesn't want that, then I just don't think anybody would accept that. And I think it only exists because it exists as it is at the moment. But I think, as we see, there's a reawakening of the consciousness of the country, and there's been a shift to what is now roughly 50-50, and that's quite incredible when you consider the full weight of the British state that is behind trying to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and you said there that you were influenced in a positive way when you went down to Manchester at a young age. Would you ever say that your football career, because obviously people have got this perception of football players make a lot of money and they'll just kind of look after themselves, would you say that's been different for you, that it opened up the world to you in your own eyes and started to look at different cultures and ways of life and the way people understand things and the way people have political attitudes?
I'm not sure whether football was the vehicle, or whether it's just something that's instinctive to me. As I said before, I'm quite inquisitive. I'm always asking questions, and probably a complete pain in the arse to my teachers at school and my parents continually, rather than just taking the first answer as gospel, it would be, no, but why? And whenever I've travelled about with football or whatever, I was always just keep open eyes and look around and see things and take in information, and I think again another thing instinctively is I've always been on the side of the little man, or the person that doesn't have everything for them. I hate bullies, and I hate people that abuse positions of power. And I know hate's a strong word, but that's something that's another thing that's instinctive to me. So if people look at a lot of the positions I hold, I would probably trace that back to being the source of a lot of it, where I don't like people who in positions of power abuse it and take advantage of it at the expense of others, because I think there's a happy medium to be had in terms of when you wield power. Of course, you're going to be able to benefit from that, but not at the expense of others. I think there's a happy medium to be able to strike, where you look out for others while also benefiting yourself.
You're saying there about how much you hate bullies, sort of unfair treatment, people abusing their position of power. You're sort of saying how you support independence because of fairness and equality and trying to create a better country. Do you think these are sort of Labour values, but because the union doesn't work, you're going for independence to try and reach these Labour values, sort of traditional Labour, old Labour, to try and bring about a more fair and equal society, and you're just sort of seeing the union as this is actually an impediment, it doesn't actually help Scotland and sort of working class people across the UK?
Well, I mean, obviously the counter to that is that, strong Labour supporters that would support the union would say that, there's no reason why that shouldn't be an aspiration for across the board in the UK. But the problem for Scotland is that, I think as we all recognise, is that that's dependent on whatever England decides again. And it comes back to the fundamental principle of democracy for me, is that people get a government that they vote for. Not some of the time, not occasionally, but all of the time. And it really frustrates me when you get this, this total, just vacuous, lacking intellectual conversation that comes about, well, I didn't get the government I voted for. And it's like, it's not about the individual, it's about the collective here. And Scotland as a collective doesn't get governments it votes for. It's simple. In no other country in the world does that exist. So, look, if we were to become independent and a right-wing conservative government were voted for, then fine. That's what the people vote for. And I also believe that, I think when you look at in Scandinavia is obviously an area of the world which is um, regularly pointed towards and looked at as very sort of egalitarian and socialist sort of area of the world, but they have right wing governments there, but they are not extremists. They're not to the same level as you may well see, for example, down south in London at the moment. So I think were there to be a right wing or right of centre government in Scotland, it wouldn't be to the harrowing levels that you see currently in the UK. So it's a matter of just general democracy. That's the fundamental for me. And my position on most things is I'm left of centre. Again, I like to try to see the balance in things. It's important to make sure that you've got money makers and entrepreneurs in the country to help to balance off and help the Europe society as a whole, rather than just purely way off to the left wing where we are scaring off people that want to make money. That's not a bad thing. It's about trying to strike that balance between the two of them. But I just see all too often that we're trapped in a cycle of not being able to actually create policies that are effective for Scotland.
Michael, you spoke there about people getting a government they vote for. Our most recent election, of course, happened in May. The SNP received a record number of constituency seats. They received a record number share of the vote. What would your reply be to Unionists or anybody, especially probably Tory members of the cabinet, that says that there's no mandate at this point in time for another independence referendum?
I would suggest, Declan, that they know full well privately themselves that it's an untenable position, but there is nothing else for them than to try to chuck that out. Look, if you tried to claim that there's no mandate, then what is there? What is there a political mandate for? Anything in Scotland? What is more representative of the Scottish people voting in a Scottish election? There isn't. That's the essence of democracy.
Yeah.
And the democratic election in Scotland of the Scottish people has elected a government with a clear mandate to proceed for a referendum. Now, if you're against independence, fine, argue your points. But to try to stop a referendum is a completely different thing. And if what you're saying is that we can't have a referendum within the UK, well, again, what does that highlight? It highlights that the UK and Scottish democracy are not compatible. And that's a dangerous argument to put forward if you are a supporter of the union.
I totally agree, and I think it makes the sort of pro-independence case stronger. It proves all the points that the UK isn't really a democracy, that a party can win 47% of the vote, and apparently they don't have a mandate because people like Ian Murray, who is the one Labour MP left in Scotland, thinks he need over 50% of the vote, and a Labour government has never had over 50% of the vote. When it comes to a referendum and when it comes to sort of building support, you're saying earlier it's basically 50-50 and that's a tremendous achievement. Every year you have more 16-year-olds registering to vote and they're basically 70% pro-independence. Michael, do you think this is sort of like a matter of time and unionist politicians are just sort of delaying the inevitable? Or do you think that there is an argument for the union that could be made that young people start to actually swing in favour of the unionist position?
Well, first of all, to answer the first part of it, I mean, I think everybody recognises that the younger generation are heavily in favour of independence. The problem is that obviously all data seems to show that younger people don't vote to the same level as older people, which then sort of weights the numbers down, quite dramatically. Is there a case for the union to be made? Well, there's always a case or an argument to be made in any subject. There's two sides to everything. Has it been articulated? No. How long are we going to wait for it to be, articulated? It's not our It's not our job to articulate that. It's for the other side to articulate it. But I think we've got to be mindful of the fact that there are a lot of people, and I long believed this during the original referendum, because I was perhaps a little bit naive and blind to this, because I just feel this is an instinctive thing. It's natural. It's normal, for a country to govern itself. But I recognise for others, they either don't want it or they're fearful of it. And I'm a firm believer. And I think that, again, the data I think pretty much showed this, was that I genuinely believe that all things being equal, you would get about 70-75% of the Scottish population that would vote for independence. They want it. They want it. So there's perhaps a 20 to 25% of the population who want it but are reluctant for some reason or another, and that is the section of the population which the unionists are trying desperately to basically just scaremonger the life out of them. I mean, I'm sure you guys are the same, but I've got friends that voted no but actually wanted to vote yes.
Yeah.
They wanted to vote yes, but they voted no.
Yeah, and change your heart, getting into the ballot box on the day. I think a lot of people.
So why is that? And it's because of just general day-to-day life things that the media can influence, that others surrounding them can influence in terms of fear. And it's the basic things about, money and general standard of living. Life's okay, not sure I want to change it. And it's that drift, and all of a sudden you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years down the line. It's like, oh, well, maybe I could have done that. And we'll never know the potential of Scotland until we actually gain control of the country. Because it drifts, it lags behind others because we don't have control of it. And yes, for many people in Scotland, life is fine. Then you have those that are at the bottom end of society who life is fucking terrible.
Yeah.
But you're going to get that in any country, whether you have control of your resources or not. There are going to be haves and have-nots. The key for me is, again, that I said before, that we are able to put policies in place to try to look after as many in society as possible. And we simply cannot do that because we don't have control of our economy. And until we can do that, we're always going to be lagging behind others, and we're always going to be at the whim or the will of people out with the country. With the greatest of respect to them, Scotland is not their primary focus. And I think as a nation, I think it is completely bizarre and unacceptable for us to allow politicians and people who don't have the country as their primary focus to hold power over us. It's illogical.
Something Professor John Curtis said to us, which I found really interesting, was that from the unionist perspective, there is a clear split in argument of how they want to run Scotland, whereas on the, use the term loosely, nationalist side, there's a clear support. But in the last election, Michael, we obviously saw a new party supportive of Scottish independence come into the fold. Obviously, they never made any breakthroughs. Do you think that possibly harmed the cause of independence and everything that went round the whole committee process between the former First Minister and the current First Minister?
I don't think it harmed the cause as a whole. No, I think it was, you're skirting around the edges. Perhaps there's, marginal impact. But I think that I get the frustration and I get the impatience of some with regards to independence, because, I wish it happened, years ago. But the reality is that we're in a situation where process at the moment is the game. That is the game. And I understand that I don't think it's necessarily in essence a bad thing to have others exerting pressure to try to move things along. But it's a fine balancing act, so that it doesn't become, a toxic debate. And I think everybody needs to respect others while we're debating that out. Again, something else that I've been a firm believer of is that IndyRef 2, in my view, is the battle here is getting to the starting line. Once the gun's fired, we've won, I believe. Whereas obviously the first referendum, you saw the shift in the polls. We came from 20% up to 45%. The campaign itself is where the battleground was. I firmly believe, and I'm pretty sure the UK government, the unionists recognise that as well, and that's why they're petrified of venturing anywhere near it, is that when the starting gun is fired, they've lost. Or the probability is that they've lost. So there is a real. This is politics. This is it's a game. It's a game of chess, and it is frustrating because people's lives are impacted in the meantime. I get all of that, but I just think when you look at the bigger picture, we've been in this union for over 300 years now. If it takes another whatever 3, 4, 5 years, then so be it. As long as we can get another referendum within this Parliament, I think we can, I think we can certainly muddy our way through regards to holding things together, because there is a bigger picture and there's a bigger goal to be won here. But I don't necessarily have an issue with having a different voice putting forward the case or exerting a little bit of pressure to try to move things along, because that's not a bad thing. I don't think it's impacted the independence debate as a whole. I certainly don't think it's helped, having the committee hearing with Alec and Nicola, and obviously clear, almost washing dirty linen in public, and it's a very, very sad incident and a sad state of affairs. But again, independence is not about two individuals.
No.
This is about 5.4 million people that are living in Scotland now.
I totally agree, Michael, about your starting gun comment. I think once a referendum is secured, I think it's probably the yes sides to lose. And I think you've probably seen that with Tommy Sheridan's campaign to get the sort of secret UK government independence polling released. I think they've been ordered by a court to release it, and they still haven't done so yet. I think they'll try to appeal it.
But they lost it last week.
Economics.
He's saying that they did appeal it and they lost it last week.
Actually,
Really?
That was I'm pretty sure, because they'd got ordered, they had to release it in 28 days, and they had appealed it, and I'm pretty sure last week that it'd come about that they'd lost the appeal.
Right, that'd be really interesting to see that, at least, because it'll prove your argument that it is ours to lose. If I can just come back on to the economics of independence, you were saying about 75 to 80% probably want Scotland to be independent. Their heart just tells them that it's not economically possible, and I think you're right with that rough estimation of about 80%. Do you think if the SNP and the Greens and even Alapa can get the economic argument right, you could win by about 75-80% in IndyRev 2?
Well, the issue becomes that it's a purely subjective thing with regards to getting the economic case right. Economics is it's a fine art. We're looking at the future. Nobody can predict with any certainty as to what's going to happen in the future. And again, I go back to we're battling against the British state here. This is an existential threat to the United Kingdom. They're going to chop everything to try to discredit. And that's all they need to do. Is they don't need to put forward a case. As ridiculous as it is, you should be weighing up two things as two proposals. But all they're doing is they're just basically trying to chip away, and just one chink, and it comes down to people's subjective views of a subject, of the issue, whether they've made the economic case or not. But you or I or anybody that's already in favour, the evidence is there. You look at small, medium-sized nations in this part of the globe who are, as I said before, by any metric, outperforming Scotland. There's the evidence for you. There's the evidence. And okay, you're going to be in a transition. You're going to be in a transitional period, moving from the United Kingdom to an independent nation involved in either the EU or EFTA or whatever it is that the Scottish people decide to move to. So there's going to be a transitional period. But excuse the language, but fuck me. We're in Scotland. We're in a country now that's part of the UK that we don't wield enough power, and we've been dragged out of fucking Europe, out of the EU, and guess what? The sky's no falling in, and the whole world's no collapse, and that's the same with independence. Yes, you're going to see certain things that will change and certain things that are more difficult, for businesses and all that with regards to Brexit. There'll be things within independence that obviously change as well, but it's not as if things are going to ground to a halt. Things will adapt and move along, and in the long run, and how long does it take? 5 years, 10 years? I don't know, but you will quite clearly see that you will have a better country at the end of it. Look, I think one of the most important comments for me that happened during IndyRef was Sir Harry Burns, the former Chief Medical Officer of Scotland.
Patrick's one of Patrick's favourite lectures, by the way. He goes on about all the time.
Is that right?
Michael. Yep. Staff Clyde Uni. You had him for social policy, didn't you?
Harry's a brilliant lecturer. I love every single one that he gives. He's such an interesting character.
Yep. Well, he may well have said this to you guys, but he certainly said it publicly during the referendum that it was talking about. Now, obviously, the position he was in, he couldn't advocate one way or the other, but I think from his comment here, I got a good sense of where his mind was. That he said, look, he was asked the question about if Scotland's to be independent, could it be beneficial to the nation's health? And he said, in the west of Scotland in particular, it's obviously been widely documented and spoken about for so long that there's areas which have a horrendous average life, age, that are worse than some war-torn areas in the Middle East and things like that. He said it's a fatalistic mentality where the industries have been taken away, they have no replacement jobs, they're stuck on unemployment benefits, and they feel like no matter what they do, they can't change their life. So it doesn't matter whether they stick another needle in their arm, or whether they get another can of beer or another bottle of whiskey or another bottle of vodka, because no matter what they do, they can't change their life. Now, they said, if with independence, these people feel closer to power, that can be transformational with regards to changing people's lives. And that, to me, again, is a logical situation, because you look at across the world, the countries that are of a smaller size have a greater trust in their government and have a greater transparency and less corruption, because people are closer to that centre, they're closer to that power base. Whereas when you're in a bigger entity, you're further away. And I've always been interested in history, and again, when I moved away from Scotland, it's something that I like to read up on, and just that mind thinking about things. And I always felt like, in 1603, when there was the Union of the Crowns and the Royal King James VI moved down to London, the Royal Court moves away from Scotland down to London. Well, that focus, that epicentre, that nation where it looks upon, that is the centre of our society, is moved away to London. There's a vacuum and a void. And I don't think that, obviously then the Union of the Parliaments in 1707 is the same sort of thing. That we're a nation without a centre, without a focal point. And that psychologically is not a good thing. And I know over the years, devolution things has started to bring it back, but we're hamstrung. We don't have that power base to actually properly enact change. And I think Sir Harry Burns' comments were, again, obviously, I'm reading into it the way I want to read into it, but it seems completely logical to me that people feel closer to change, they feel more empowered to make change.
Yeah, something with James McInerney on the show, who spoke about the attainment gap. And again, Michael, he said, governments can throw as much money at it as they want. It won't be solved unless you fix it as a social issue with kids in poverty, because it's not something that's going to be fixed in a union. It's clearly not working if you put all your attention towards it as an independent country. say it can be fixed, but at this point in time, as you say, we're hamstrung. And, for me and Patrick, we've always known there to be a Scottish Parliament, but it's a Scottish Parliament that is limited in power and can only do so much. And I think now we're at a point that, under those early years of Labour and Lib Dem governments, they used devolution to an extent, but never pushed it to the max.
Yes.
We've now probably seen in the past 14 years an SNP government that have used the powers that they've got and pushed it till it can't go anywhere else. And that's at the point where, I think people need to look at, are we quite happy just doing this and letting the UK government make decisions for us, or can we take that next step as an independent country to make our own decisions? Yeah.
Declan, this is like, we basically have a glass ceiling here. And the problem is that the Scottish Parliament, under the SNP government, are basically smashing and trying to crack this glass ceiling. And there's all the forces from above that are trying to suppress that. And that is it. You're right. We're right up against that, button against this glass ceiling.
Yep.
And there's nowhere else for us to go. But we recognise, and I hear so many people saying, oh, we've got all these powers that we need to do this and we need to do that with. Or until we're able to deal with the powers that we've got, then we shouldn't have anything. It's like, again, what other nation in the world would talk about their own government in such a way that, of course, do you think every other nation in the world is like some utopia where all the citizens are happy with how the government are handling things? Of course they're not. But do you think any of them turn and go, well, we should just hand those powers over to somewhere else and let them make the decisions for us? It is such an illogical position and argument to put forward.
Do you think that, if Scotland probably leading the way to become an independent country, we could see a complete breakup of the Union? We've obviously saw tension in the north of Ireland due to Brexit. Wales, of course, I know Labour did well in the last election there, but Plaid Cymru is always going to be chipping away at it. And we're even seeing a kind of north and south divide in England. It was interesting last night to hear Tories in the south worried about so much money going towards the north. Do you think there's going to be a split in the UK if Scotland is to leave, and it could be the very end of the Union?
Well, it's very difficult to predict how these things are going to play out. But Scotland is the conduit almost for Northern Ireland to be connected with the UK. That's where the close connections are, I feel. And if Scotland was to leave the UK, it leaves a huge gap between the North of Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. And we already see the stresses and the strains because of the ideology of the Brexiteers just not giving two hoots about anybody else other than themselves, and how that is impacted on Northern Ireland. Then they can pass out all this full outrage about, the integrity of the United Kingdom. They didn't give two fucks about Ireland and the implications of it and during Brexit. Did not care. And if you spoke to anybody that had any idea about Ireland, it was very obvious from the get-go that you could not be out of the EU and out of the single market and the customs union and not have a border either on land or in the sea. There's no way around it,
No.
And they tried to fudge and obfuscate and make everything out to be, different from reality. But they're the facts. And that is the facts right now. There's a border down the sea.
It was something that just wasn't in the argument at all, as if it just didn't exist when we were talking about Brexit.
Well, it never existed before the vote, and they've had to address the reality after it, but they've constantly tried to, it's smoke and mirrors. It's like try to deflect and change. It really is incredible. It's Orwellian, and it's campaigned to make people think that reality is something else. But I do think that if Scotland was to leave, then it's. Look, the Great Britain is Scotland and England. That is it. It's the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, right? But Great Britain is effectively Scotland and England coming together. And you take Scotland away, then it really does feel like that, you could well. Yeah, and I'm not going to get drawn into the whole sort of technical minutiae about, Wales being a principality or a country or whatever. Wales is a country, but no, I mean, and I'm talking about in a historical sense with regards to, obviously the Senate's been back dealing with, devolution and Welsh domestic issues since 99 as well, and ultimately, for me, if Wales want a referendum and want independence, then it's completely up to the Welsh people what they want to do. But I do think that if Scotland was to leave the UK, that it would ramp up that thought process in the Welsh psyche as to, what is it that we're actually remaining in here, and what is it that we're wanting to be part of. And obviously, if Scotland was to show the way forward in terms of being successful, then there is no greater argument for the Welsh nationalists to say, look, this is how you do it. Scotland's just done it,
Michael, we're talking about Britain and Ireland, and I think everyone listening will know the British history in Ireland for the last 850 years or so.
Yeah.
You've seen under this government in Libya, Syria, Yemen, and then Blair in Afghanistan and Iraq. One of the big arguments for independence is getting rid of the nuclear weapons on the River Clyde.
Yep.
And also, I think the SNP's proposal is to join NATO, although we wouldn't have the nuclear weapons. Do you think even just to weaken Britain on the global stage, but also have Scotland as a sort of peacekeeping or a peaceful nation on the global stage would be just another benefit of Scotland becoming independent?
Yeah, the long and short of it. I think I don't see in the current climate and the world we live in, I don't see what benefits Scotland has in being some sort of global power as part of a union. It's trumped up exceptionalism that the world doesn't exist like that anymore. You have the United States. UK's keeping itself on. They're not a superpower, and the trident on the up in Helensburgh and Faslane is it's an American system. It's the Americans that have got it there. But let's not kid ourselves on, right? And the reason that Scotland, in my view, will be in a strong position come independence is that when you're talking about NATO and people talk about how can you get rid of nuclear weapons but still remain in NATO? Look, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organisation. Somebody will explain to me what it is that surrounds Scotland. It's the North Atlantic. How could you have a treaty organisation that doesn't want the nation that is literally at the epicentre of that? And there's a fantastic book by Tim Marshall. It's called Prisoners of Geography, and it's all about the geopolitics of the whole globe. And there's a short reference to independence. There's not a great detail in it, but it talks about one of the biggest concerns and the issues from the UK's perspective is that what they call the GI-UK gap. I would call it the GIS gap. So it's Greenland, Iceland, Scotland. When you look at it on the globe, it's basically the gateway for the Russian naval fleet to flood into the North Atlantic. And that gap is what has to be policed by NATO. So if you take out Scotland away from that, there is a gaping hole for the Russians to basically do as they please. So Scotland has to be at the epicentre of any coordination and cooperation with these allied partners around the world. So it's not to say that, oh well, we can do as we please, because they'll just desperately want us and need us. Of course, we're going to have to give and take things. That's the world over. You give up some sovereignty to gain access to other things. But in the modern world, that's just simple. That's what everybody does. But the current UK, what we do is we give up complete sovereignty, and we're given a little bit back here and there. But ultimately, we're told, shut up and deal with what you've got. Otherwise, we'll just take that off you. And that is just completely ludicrous. So geographically, the geopolitics of it, Scotland is in a strong position.
You make a great point about just how important Scotland is for the geopolitical sort of Western setup. What you're saying about how Britain's sort of a second-rate power now, because even if Scotland was to go independent, they're so second-rate that if we were to give the nukes back, England and Wales don't have anywhere to store them, and they'd have to send them to France, which is just absolutely hilarious. You wouldn't hear that in the United States or Russia or China. And when it comes to NATO, I think you've got about 32 NATO members, and only 5 of them have nuclear weapons. So there's no sort of nuclear necessity to be a member of NATO at all.
No, there's not. But I mean, ultimately as well, we need to be aware of the reality is that we have nuclear weapons on our shores right now, and then to rid ourselves of them, it's not straightforward. I don't think it is just as black and white as we become independent. We say like we're getting rid of them, like get them away tomorrow. I don't know how these things. But ultimately, again, this is another one of those situations where that will be and should be a decision for the Scottish people and the Scottish government. But we have to take into consideration the ramifications of that, and also when we're trying to, work collaboratively with others, that there's certain things that we need to accept might not all go the way we want. But if it comes to the crunch, we then have the power to say, well, do you know what? We're just getting rid of them, and that's the decision we want to make. But again, right now, there's got no power over it, which is it's another one of those ludicrous situations that we find ourselves in. And also that the classic situation that we see is that you then get the counter argument is that Faslane dockyard that creates like pluck a figure out of thin air, 1 million jobs. I think they talk about something like 12,000 jobs or whatever. And then there was I'm pretty sure there was a Freedom of Information request or whatever that showed it was less than 100 jobs were directly employed on the nuclear weapons, and that this supply chain that they talk about as well is a figment of imagination, and that most of the positions at the base are transient, and that they don't stay in the local communities. They live on the base and they move, and they go back down south when they're not working, spending the money in the local communities they live in down south. So the local area, Helensburgh and these areas, they don't see that benefit because the people don't work and stay there. They live on the base and they live elsewhere. So all that money that is spent, the wealth is not incorporated into the local area to the same extent as a normal, base with people living in the local communities would.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to take in what you've said there, Michael. Firstly, a simple process of Scotland voting for the government it wants and that government making a decision on it. And then on, nuclear weapons, for a country, the UK is a collective, Scotland part of that, can't feed, especially England, can't feed school kids properly, but yet can spend billions of pounds annually and is to be challenged on it by a footballer as a ludicrous disgrace it became that position. But on, nuclear weapons, I would much rather that the money spent on renewables is something that we're seeing that there's a greater want for, and something that we need to adapt to in the coming years. And if the money that we're spending on nuclear weapons could be spent on renewables, we'd be in such a better position. But on renewables and on Trident, 2 policy areas, if Scotland were to become an independent country in the next 5 years or so, what policies would you like to see at the forefront of that independent country's decision making?
Well, to touch on what you just brought up there, which is an interesting one, is the fact that, again, that just highlights the gulf in thinking and desire between two nations. That I think, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the latest stats are that we are now producing almost or slightly more than 100% of our energy needs in renewables in Scotland. But there's no policies in place to actually drive that forward, Scottish specific, because this is a UK wide industry again, and the when you look at, for example, the renewable energy sector, is there any companies and initiatives in Scotland that are being able to exploit that expanding market? Not really. You don't see it. And that comes back to, again, what I was saying before about putting policies in place to help burgeoning sectors of the economy grow. And that should be happening all over. But the problem is, again, because something that may well be central to a Scottish economy isn't central to a UK economy. So if we become independent, and it's almost past the point anyway, but just to use renewables as an example, we should be putting tax breaks in place for companies to set up, to be able to build the infrastructure, to then be able to reap the benefits of these renewables. Most of the infrastructure that's built Scandinavia, France, Germany, elsewhere, and is shipped over here is built up in offshore or on land or whatever, and the companies are not actually in Scotland. I want to see a circular economy where we're actually being able to put policies in place to help companies grow, so that we then become a base of inventive, innovative thinking here that can benefit off of the natural resources we have in Scotland. And seldom does that happen because we can't actually control the policy making.
I think what you're talking about there is a sort of like an inclusive growth economic policy that the Scottish Government would sort of be aiming for by having a state-owned energy company maybe, and building wind farms and solar panels, and procurement being based in Scotland, getting Scottish companies to make the wind farms, make the solar panels, and get public spending back into Scottish private companies, and try to boost the economy that way.
Of course it is. And look, here's another one. You hear so often about how shipbuilding would just disappear if we weren't in part of the Union. And you look across the North Sea in Norway, and you look at the shipyards that they've got there, and the procurement that they're able to get, and the books that they've got of jobs to build ships. And it's like, all right, is Norway a naval supremo around the world? No. But it's about building up it's a high wage economy, a highly skilled economy. And in the UK, it's not. It's a renters economy. You build up assets and you fleece the public purse to pay for your assets. And you've driven down manufacturing, you've driven down high skilled jobs. And don't get it wrong, of course there are still high skilled jobs, but they're not at the forefront of the economy. And I think Scotland has a possibility to be able to do something a little bit different in that regard.
Michael, we probably couldn't have you on and not just kind of touching your football career and talk about football linked to politics. Firstly, I found the most recent film about Sir Alex Ferguson really interesting, when he was talking about trying to use examples of people down coal mines and pits and in shipyards to get across to footballers. Did you ever see when you played under Sir Alex that has politics shined through? I mean, a lot of people would probably say his politics are a bit off the scale, a unionist socialist, but it's a millionaire. But was that something that shined through when you played at Manchester United?
Yeah, well, I think it's at the core of who he is, and not to get into an argument with here, but I think you need to push back as well with regards to a unionist socialist millionaire. He's done well, and I don't think we should begrudge somebody that. And
no, I love him. I don't have anything against Sir Alex.
The reason that he's done so well is because of those core beliefs that he just worked his backside off, and he's an incredible desire to just win, but win while trying to foster that greater good, and this comes back to what I was saying before about when you're able to wield power, when you wield it purely for your own benefit, that infuriates me. And I think Sir Alex is an absolute perfect example of it. And don't get me wrong, by the way, he's decapitated people when he has it, but he's always had that aim of for the greater good, and obviously he benefits from that as well, because he's he's effectively the captain of the ship. But what he's doing all along is he's raising the tide for everybody, so that everybody benefits from it. And that is, it's a core belief of his. And I've not actually seen the latest documentary, but it's a theme that I know and I can understand well, where his working class roots of collectively working together down the pit, on the shipyards, those sorts of things, to make things better for not just yourself but for everybody. And that's just something that, as I said earlier on, that seems right to me. It seems natural. We are a species where we live in tribes. There's always going to be an element of us and them. That's human nature. But what I don't like is when it becomes to the individual level, where it's people literally fighting everybody just to scrap to get ahead. There has to be some collective on some level. And when it comes to the crunch, having that innate ability to be able to say, do you know what, I'm not going to do that because I think that fucks over everybody else. I think that's if you can develop and foster that mentality in people, then I think that develops a good and a better society where you want to better yourself, you want to make a better life for your family. That is normal. That is a human instinct, but don't do it at the expense of everybody else.
Michael, I came across a clip on YouTube of you talking to a journalist called Derek Bateman, I think in the weeks leading up to the referendum in 2014.
Yep.
And it just starts off with you saying, if you tell a young footballer, you're not going to make it, you're not going to make it, you're not going to make it, it's going to come true. And that's what happens with Scotland, being in the union, being the smaller partner, not getting the government it votes for. And it's a great analogy. But if you're to take it literally, do you think when it comes to sport and in particular football, with us being the smaller partner, the less successful national team, the less successful club teams, do you think with independence, football could sort of take a step up and thrive, where we're not constantly compared to our neighbours who are much bigger and much richer?
Well, I think I don't think it's as simple as we become independent and things, become better. But I do believe that taking away that constant prism of viewing everything through an English perspective is debilitating. It's not right. It's not the right thing to do. And
psychologically.
Psychologically, England's always going to be there. So there's always going to be an element of comparison. But I do think that with independence, we start to drift away from it being everything put through that prism. And I do think it would be beneficial. I mean, look, just for example, and during the referendum, I got involved in a few sports debates with some athletes and who were in favour of the union, and it was just a incredible debate. It was what's his name, Whittle, who's now David Whittle, no, who's now a Tory MSP. He was involved in the 4x100 metres with Great Britain, I think, at the Olympics, and he'd won medals and stuff. And he brought in his medals, and he's like, I wouldn't have won these medals if it wasn't for Great Britain. And I was trying to say to him, look, it's not about you. It's not about you on an individual level. It's about the country as a collective whole. How many people in Scotland have not been able to experience Olympics or major tournaments because they weren't able to get into that team? Now, what's better? What's better to have, say, 2 or 3 Scots who have won, umpteen gold medals, or to have hundreds of people who have been to an occasion like that and had their aspirations met? They've had their vision of a better life being lifted up because they've seen things that they wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And that, to me, I think there isn't an argument there. Of course, it's better to have more, getting better experiences. Like the Olympics here just now, I think Scotland have got maybe 47, I think it was, perhaps 47 athletes. Ireland have got 100 at the Olympics, right? Now, I don't know what the medals tally will be in the end, right? But I believe that when you're a young kid, right, and you're getting shoved through the prism of Team GB, and you are getting knocked away at the earlier stages, I think that can be a negative thing. That then you lose that talent, or you lose that ability, or you lose that desire to want to continue to better yourself because you've not, reached the levels that you want to get to. It's not to say it happens every time, but whereas if we're at Scotland, again, some of those guys and girls might not reach the Olympic level that they need to, times they need to run to get in there, but I think there's a greater possibility of getting more people getting greater experiences and greater exposure and having better life affirming experiences rather than just being within TGB and not being able to get through. And again, the other thing that comes into it is politics comes into it. And there'd be the same in a purely Scottish team as well. But we're talking about all Scots, whereas within Team GB and Alec Arthur, the boxer who I'm pally with, Alec used to talk about in the boxing sense. He says it was a total farce. Scottish boxers that were basically just like not even looked at. He says we were far better than others that were, taken to Olympics and stuff like that, purely because they might not have wanted to move down south to train, or they might not wanted to have had funding from that source, or couldn't get funding from here or there. And these things happen all the time. These are things that are not unique to sport. That is the economy and the country over, where we are competing within an internal market where our country is not the primary focus.
I think as well, Michael, as you say there, only 47 Scots, it's maybe compared to Ireland, it could be an extra 53 role models for young people. It's when you're getting into communities and people are coming from that community and they can look towards somebody and, like Sir Alex that we were just talking about there, who says he comes from Govan and will always be from Govan. People like that are people that inspire young people, inspire us to go and achieve more and break through barriers.
You couldn't be more on point. And that was something that I said at the time a few years ago, where it was like, if you're a young kid from wherever, up in Aberdeen, are you going to be inspired to the same level by seeing somebody from Birmingham who's at the Olympics or whatever, or somebody that's from Aberdeen that actually your cousin knows? You'd be like, oh, my cousin knows, we James that's at the Olympic. Those things that are more tangible. And it comes back to what Sir Harry Burns said. When you feel closer to power, you feel more empowered to enact that change. And it's exactly the same in this instance that you just said there, Declan. If you've got somebody from your community that's competing on that level, that fills you fully believe that I can do that as well.
100%.
Just finally for me, Michael, before we wrap up, you'll have heard about it's another increase in tugs deaths in Scotland, 1,339. The government admits it's a failure, and there's definitely more that can be done.
Yep.
But with devolution, we don't have the power to decriminalise open, safe consumption rooms like they have in Portugal, Switzerland, across the world. Is this one of the big things that you would like to see implemented quickly after independence? Is it a massive priority for you?
Well, I mean, if it's not anybody's priority, then I think there's, they need to sort of look at themselves and figure out why is it not a priority. But again, this comes back to on a different slightly angle here. That this is a social issue. This is not purely a drug issue; it's a social issue. Why are people driven to substances like that? And then you need to look at it. And again, I go back to this. It's a circular economy. One thing impacts the other. I mean, you don't have control of your full economy, then you're limiting the ability to be able to attack this issue. But right now, if I was in the government, I would actively go ahead and implement the policies you want to implement, even if you're being told you can't do it. Go and do it. It's up to the UK government then to challenge and say, you need to shut that down. And how ludicrous would that be? How ludicrous would that be? So I would be actively seeking to implement the policies right now, and so be it. If they want to say that's out with your remit, I'm sorry, but saving people's lives is more important than pontificating about the fine detail of what's within your remit or not. This is a health crisis, this is a social issue, and it needs to be dealt with everything that we possibly can, and not allow ourselves to be, contained within this, as I said before, this glass ceiling. Go out and deal with the issue right now. But, touching on Portugal, obviously, as you'll be fully aware, Portugal decriminalised all drugs. I think it was maybe 15 years ago or something like that now. And in shock horror, what's happened since? Every metric shows that it's been a roaring success. Drug deaths down, safe consumption, has made a big, impact on that. But that is, and drug use is also down as well. So all the scaremongering about, oh, you do something like that, then drug, no, it doesn't. And there's the data, there's the evidence to show you that. Unfortunately, we couldn't go to that length because, again, we don't control the laws of the land in all these instances. But right now, I would go ahead and implement the policies and try to force the UK government to, go and challenge us. Because how utterly pathetic and ludicrous would that look? You're actively trying to debilitate and stop a country dealing with what is a major issue.
And Peter Crikant's been somebody that's led the way and shown that safe consumption can work and actually save people's lives by doing it. So the example is there for everybody to show. Michael, just lastly from me, while we've been on air, it's been announced that most restrictions are to end on the 9th of August. Hallelujah. Social distancing is going to go. Just a final point from me. With that news, what are you looking forward to doing? I'm sure you'll be looking forward to larger crowds at football stadiums. And something else to ask you. Obviously, you're very much so involved in politics and your opinion on Twitter. Would you ever go into it as a kind of later stage career? Because you would definitely get my vote, and I think we get Patrick's vote as well if you ever run for First Minister.
So what am I looking forward to first and foremost with the restrictions? Do you know? I mean, I don't know about you guys, but there isn't anything that actually jumps to my mind. I'm a dad that's got 3 young kids, and I love being outdoors. So there's not a great deal that I've now started, because things have drifted along, and I feel like I've been able to live a fairly normal life the last week while, and I'm not out in nightclubs and pubs all the time because that's not my life anymore.
Get plenty of whiskey in the house anyway, as we all see.
Exactly.
I think we've unfortunately lost Michael. It's a pity. I don't know if we're going to come back in, but
it was a pleasure having him.
Yeah, it was a pleasure having him on. I don't know if he'll still be able to tune in to see us just wrapping up, but yeah, he's been on a good hour there. We really appreciate him coming on and giving his time up for the both of us, and that was a really interesting chat there.
And very articulate about his views. He's very clear. He's obviously been interested in it for a long time. He knows his history as well. So he's very clear about what he believes, and it's backed up by the facts. He knows the history of not only Scotland, England, Wales, the Union, geopolitics as well. It's hard to argue with his views, but also because we believe the same. But very intelligent.
Yeah, it puts it all across in a way that you can relate to. And again, this is a public figure that doesn't need to come out and give his politics. The other guys that he stands in BT Sport and BBC with aren't as vocal on Twitter and stuff.
You don't know what their political views are.
No. So, we'll wrap it up there. We were chatting about whiskey. If Michael can still hear us, we hope he enjoys a few drams at the weekend. And thanks to everybody for joining us in the comments. And thanks for joining us on the State of Politics.